central banks have to tread carefully. It may be a now or never moment for Europe. If you don't move forward, you fall off the bike.
Welcome to The Big Question, the series from Euronews where we speak to some of the most influential people in the world of business. I'm Angela Barnes and I am joined by Beata Javorcik, the Chief Economist for the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development. Thank you ever so much for joining us on The Big Question. It's a pleasure to have you with us on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So first of all, if we could just start off by talking about what are the economic risks in 2025 that you are most concerned about?
First, conflict. The war in Ukraine is still raging. We have a ceasefire in the Middle East, but that's not the same as peace. And of course, the situation in Syria is far from stable. Second, fragmentation of the global economy. I mean, this process has been going for quite a while. In 2016, we had the Brexit referendum, which rolled back integration of services sectors between the UK and the EU. Then in 2018, the US-China trade war has started. In 2022, sanctions on Russia were imposed. And certainly unwinding of globalisation is going to have negative consequences for the global economy.
For Europe's competitiveness, what do you foresee this year for Europe? How far away are they from catching up with the likes of China and the US?
Well, if you read the Draghi report, the diagnosis is rather stark. Europe will not be able to maintain its standards of living if it continues on its current path. But paradoxically, shocks that Europe may experience in 2025 may focus minds and lead to action. It may be a now or never moment for Europe.
Donald Trump's tariffs for Europe could be hugely detrimental, for example.
Well, it's difficult to predict. It matters whether every country will be subject to the same tariff and every industry. But, we cannot control what's happening in terms of other countries' policies. So therefore, I think Europe should focus on what's within our control, namely finding sources of competitiveness within the single market.
What about Russian sanctions? How have they impacted its economy in 2024? And do you think its fortunes will change course with Donald Trump in power?
Western sanctions imposed on exports to Russia have led to a dramatic drop in European sales to Russia. Some of that trade has been replaced by exports from other countries, namely China and Turkey, though probably the technological content of those exports is different. And you see in the data that foreign affiliates located in those countries choose not to supply the Russian market. So sanctions have been taking a toll on Russian productivity by depriving Russia of sophisticated technologies embodied in capital goods. Moreover, there has been an exit of Western multinationals. No new FDI is flowing to Russia, and that means lower knowledge flows. So these are the effects that are not visible immediately. They work slowly, but they certainly are beginning to take a toll on the Russian economy.
Now, inflation and monetary policy, let's talk about that. How do you see inflationary pressures evolving in 2025? And what measures should central banks take to keep inflation in check without stifling economic recovery?
So let me talk about emerging markets where my institution, the EBRD, is active. We have seen quite a fast process of disinflation by historical standards, though inflation remains 1 percentage point above the pre-COVID level. Of course, performance of countries has been uneven, and some countries, such as, for instance, Turkey, are still facing a very high inflation. In Europe this year, if you believe futures markets, we are going to see an uptick in prices of natural gas, and that's certainly going to put inflationary pressures. So I think central banks have to tread carefully and react to the data as the data comes in.
Are you keeping an eye on oil prices too? Is that something that is of particular concern?
Well, oil prices are very important as an indicator for assessment of any economic activity. Though, of course, if you believe that the US is going to increase production of oil, that could actually lead to lower oil prices. So that would put a downward pressure on inflation.
And let's talk about technology and digital transformation. How do you think technological advancements, particularly in AI and automation, of course, how do you think that will shape the workforce and labour markets in 2025?
Well, technological progress translates into structural changes in the economy. If you think about Europe, Western European countries are much more exposed to AI eliminating some jobs. In Eastern Europe, it's more automation of manufacturing that will have an impact on the production process.
What sectors in emerging markets do you expect to see the most growth in 2025?
So I'm very optimistic about services in emerging Europe. Quite a few countries in emerging Europe have succeeded at importing ICT services, and the fact that many of them are in Schengen, in the same time zone, that they have the same data protection regime as the Western European countries, bodes well for greater export of services. Moreover, as companies are considering their carbon footprint, they are discovering that carbon emissions embodied in services they buy constitute a big chunk of that carbon footprint. So proximity of Eastern European countries makes them more attractive as suppliers of ICT services.
And I just want to talk to you as well, lastly, about EU integration. What is your outlook for the economic integration of countries in the Balkans and Eastern Europe for 2025?
Well, it is in the interest of the European Union to have stable and prosperous neighbors. It is in the interest of accession countries to use the accession process as an anchor for reforms. And we've seen how well that has worked in the first wave of accession that finished in 2004. So the EU needs to show credible path for these countries to join the community, while these countries have to exert effort to match the standards that are expected. It's a bit like with riding bicycle. You need to make progress, because if you don't move forward, you fall off the bike.
Well, thank you ever so much for your insights. It's been fantastic to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you very much all for watching this episode of The Big Question. And don't forget, you can catch all our shows on the Euronews YouTube channel and on our website, euronews.com. Head over to the business page.